The way you get to that exponential growth is leverage on your people, your time, your talent, and your resources. So every dollar, every hour you spend every day, you got to make sure you're getting the most bang for your buck. That's the difference between good versus great. Early days, you overcompensate for lack of experience. I know I did, but just working my ass off really hard on all 100 decisions. You learn what 10 product decisions matter. If you get the right 10 decisions and get the right answers, you're going to do better than most. You want diversity on your board. I think you want, like all things, a creative tension. As a founder or CEO, you probably want folks around the table that are going to help you make the company better, and that's going to have tension.
Welcome to Venture Confidential, a series of conversations with top minds in venture capital. I'm your host, Peter Chapman. In today's episode, I interview Jerry Chen, a partner at Greylock. We talk about what he learned during his tenure at VMware, his three-pronged framework for evaluating enterprise software companies, and what it means to be a good board member. As always, if you've got questions or want to be in touch, email me at vc@heavybit.com. Jerry, welcome to Venture Confidential.
Thanks for having me. It's not really confidential, is it?
Welcome to Venture Broadcast.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you.
You know, I don't have exact numbers, but I think our listenership is small enough that it's still semi-confidential at this point. Yeah. You graduated from Stanford with an engineering degree, spent a couple of years at a consulting company, a couple of years in private equity, went to business school, and then VMware for 9 years. Why VMware?
A couple reasons. One, it was the smartest people I found. Mm-hmm. And in my career, I've always followed where the talent is. So after Stanford, I went to Bain because the smartest people working at Bain, San Francisco then. It was 1995, 96. Netscape just went public. It was the dot-com days. And we were just tracking a lot of smart people. And then after that, a couple of tours in New York in private equity, a tour in venture capital during the dot-com days. And then when I was at business school, I did an internship for VMware, and there were smartest engineers, smartest business people, smartest product people. And, regardless of the market, the industry, or the job title, I just follow the smart people.
Tell me about those early years. VMware during this time seemed to just be a breeding ground for future talent. Like, we've seen so many cool leaders emerge from this sort of decade at VMware. What was it like working there?
It was amazing. I guess I was lucky. I helped create a couple product lines there, Cloud Foundry in later days, and early days, something called VDI, or Virtualized Desktop Infrastructure. And I think what VMware was, it was a magnet of talent. Like I said, smart people attract smart people. And then B, the competition against Microsoft and other competitors like Oracle or Sun in the early days was a crucible, because it forced us to be ruthless about prioritizing our product features, our engineering, our go-to-market sales resources. Because when you're doubling in headcount and doubling in revenue every single year, sometimes you think it's easy, right? Sometimes in many ways from the outside, it's like, wow, these guys are growing so fast that anything they do works well, but it's not by accident, right? So part of the market is like sucking you up inside the proverbial tornado, if you will. But also, the way you get to that exponential growth is leverage on your people, your time, your talent, and your resources. So every dollar, every hour you spend every day, you got to make sure you're getting the most bang for your buck. And that's the difference between good versus great. When you're early in your career, you have 100 decisions you can make in a week or a month. 10 matter, right? 10 decisions matter. So the difference between good versus great is knowing which 10 decisions to spend time, focus on, and get right. Because the other 9 decisions, either 1, someone else will make the decision, 2, you can fix it later, or 3, it's a rounding error. So just like when I ran product, there's only 10 features of any product that matters. You get those 10 right, you're great. And any job, running a product, running sales, running engineering, if you get the right 10 decisions and get the right answers, you're going to do better than most.
How do you figure out what those key product decisions are?
A lot of experience. So, IQ and intellect helps, but early days, you overcompensate for lack of experience. I know I did, but just working my ass off really hard on all 100 decisions. And when you realize, you're working 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, either coding or writing product or writing sales, you're not working smarter, you're working more, not even harder. And so partly it's experience. You learn what 10 product decisions matter. Partly you get mentorship. So you seek out folks inside the company, outside the company that can give you some advice. And 3, study what's worked in the past, what's worked in analogous businesses and in other markets. But the hard part of studying the past or studying other products is understanding what are the right lessons to learn and not the wrong ones. And what I mean by this is oftentimes as investors or product people or founders, we see success, we see failure, and we're pulling the wrong lesson, right? We're learning the wrong pattern, the wrong anti-pattern. And the truth of the matter is oftentimes the driver for success is something a layer or 2 layers deeper. So it's not necessarily, the right channel. It's, okay, what the product feature was. Was it a right move versus competitor? Was it the right pricing thing? And oftentimes you stop like, oh yeah, they priced it correctly, or they got the right developer aesthetic correctly. That's not true at all, right? Sometimes there's a second or third question to get right, and the difference is don't stop when you have what you think is the right answer. Ask 1 or 2 more questions. And so if you're always asking these questions as a product person or an investor or as a founder, you'll probably get the right answer eventually.
I'd love to sort of walk through this. Maybe we could talk about a feature or product you launched at VMware that had an obvious lesson and a less obvious lesson.
Okay, well, we'll start with early days, something called virtualized desktop infrastructure. So I joined VMware 03 as an intern, and then 04, 05, 06, I ran their enterprise desktop business. So we had a product called Workstation, which earlier was VMware's first product, right? For developers, loved it. For QA, for testing browsers, and ran Linux on Windows and Windows on Linux. And so we tried to create a product called ACE, like assured computing environment. So basically workstation with security features, encrypted VMs, you basically locality. So we did a secure hash. You can move the VM around. We had VM lifecycle. So it would time out and like self-destruct. And that product never really took off, right? And we couldn't understand why originally, because we thought a lot of these features customers wanted. They were asking for them. At the same time, we had a bunch of other customers using VMware's server product. It was called ESX Server at the time, now vSphere. But there's the bare metal hypervisor. They were hosting Windows virtual machines, desktop VMs on servers, and using like a remote desktop protocol to connect to these VMs. And we were like, why? I mean, were they just hosting these VMs because of cheaper licensing for legacy applications? And we could have just stopped there and said, hey, it's just another use case for the server product. But I spent a lot of time talking to the customers, asking what was the driver? Why were they hosting virtualized desktops on VMware? Why weren't they using Citrix or some other product to host terminal sessions? And it became pretty clear that, one, for a bunch of desktop applications and for all the idiosyncrasies that Windows has, hosting individual desktops made more sense for app compatibility. And also people wanted their own workspace, right? Their own VMs, their own world that Windows especially lent itself was designed around single user, not multiple users. And so by asking the next 2 or 3 questions on these use cases, we basically said there's actually a market for hosting desktops on the server. We call it VDI, Virtualized Desktop Infrastructure. And we built that to whole business. And Amazon years later is now hosting workspaces on their Amazon cloud in much the same way. And it could have been easy to say, hey, let's just stop the first question or 2. But if you dive deeply talking to customers and talking to your engineers and understanding how the product was used, you actually found value that wasn't obvious at the time.
You had a brief stint in venture. You worked at Excel for a couple of years before business school.
That's correct.
And then a decade later, you come back to venture. I want to talk about both bookends here. What were those 2 years like?
It was the weirdest time to be in VC because I joined Excel in 2000, the peak of the dot-com mania. So like term sheets were going out the door. There were, like pet sock commercials on the Super Bowl. And it was the peak of the dot-com mania, if you will. Like companies were going public with like no revenue, losing tons of money. It was amazing. And then I saw the crash, right? So then when the NASDAQ, the market crashed, and then I watched a bunch of companies, startups that had great ideas or great technical teams, couldn't get funding, went out of business. So for me, in that 2-year period as an associate, I was able to see what it was like at a super bull market and a super bear market, which is great because you learn both success and failure in the investment business, both wild success for almost no reason, and then failure for almost no reason because the market's bad. And at the same time at Excel, I was able to work with some really talented investors. Peter Fenton and Teresa Ranzetta and Jim Getz were all there. I had worked with Teresa and Peter at a previous job in consulting, and so that relationship brought me to Accel. And so with Breyer, Wagner, Swartz, Patterson, that whole team there, which is a bunch of great investors. So I was surrounded by smart people, and I saw this incredible bubble and deflation of the bubble. But after that, as a young associate, was 24, 25, trying to invest or advise founders, and you realize, as someone who's never had a real job, never shipped product, how can I be a good investor? So how am I a good picker of companies? How can I be a good board member or advisor? And why would you, across the table, Peter, pick me as your board member? And I realized the VCs and the people at the board meetings I went to that add a lot of value actually had experience shipping product. And so I went to business school, spent some time learning kind of the language and grammar of business there, and then joined VMware for almost 10 years, where I was able to see that rise from like 250 employees to 15,000 and from like 50 million to 5 billion in revenue, and just ship tons of product. I understood product, understood engineering, understood go-to-market, understood partnerships. That would have made me a better executive, no matter what I did, but also I think makes me a better investor and a better board member.
You're telling me that your 10 years at VMware was just your own way of getting ready for venture.
Yes and no. I would say no job prepares you for VC. VC prepares you no job. So you never go to VMware for 10 years or any company for 10 years, assuming you want to go to venture. Because after I left Accel and joined VMware, I'm like, hey, this is great. I love shipping product. I'm never going to do venture capital again. And you don't take a job because you want to be in VC. And anyone who's curious about it, like you can never predict these careers. But what are the odds you do 2 years at one VC firm, spend a decade at a company, have it go public in New York Stock Exchange, and then join another great VC firm? You can never predict these things from the beginning. But I got lucky. I got lucky working with great people at Accel, great people at VMware, and then I'm super fortunate now to work with an amazing partnership at Greylock, which I hope to spend the next 10, 15 years of my career with.
What brought you back into venture?
It's a great question. I think my partner, Reid Hoffman, calls it tours of duty, right? And as you think about your career, and so I think about my 10 years of VMware in two major tours of duty. The first, working for Diane Green, creating the desktop business. The second tour of duty, the last 4 or 5 years, was working for the second CEO, Paul Maritz, creating Cloud Foundry and that whole application platform team that had vFabric, Spring, and a bunch of other products in it. And at the end of that tour of duty, Paul spun off. We spun off a bunch of my team to Pivotal. A new CEO is coming in, Pat Gelsinger. He's done a great job. And that's kind of a logical bookend. So I did 2 tours of duty. And the question was, do I want to do a third at VMware and do something else, which I could have done. But I said, after 10 years, I wanted a new challenge. So I took some time off. And during that time, I traveled, reestablished some hobbies, talked to a bunch of startups, talked to a bunch of VC firms, and I never intended to go back to VC, but I had a relationship with a bunch of venture capitalists over the years. I got close to the Accel folks early, but in particular, I got close to the Greylock partners, Anil Busri in particular. Anil was a general partner at Greylock. Also, he's founder, CEO of Workday, one of the definitive enterprise SaaS companies out there. Anil and I connected, and the way he described Greylock is a very special place, right? All the partners around the table are operators and product people. Like Reid Hoffman created LinkedIn and PayPal. David Z was early product person at Excite at Home before he became a VC and invested in Facebook and Pandora and LinkedIn. Anil was a product person at PeopleSoft, and then he created Workday while partner at Greylock. And so it's kind of like my partner John Lilly would say, like, your tribe, is the DNA, and we all think about the world similarly. I think Anil described it. We're entrepreneurs with like a VC checkbook, and that's how we think about things. And that team felt right for me, and it felt like it was a partnership that I wanted to be part of, and I could practice VC, the job and the career and the art, if you will, the way I wanted to, which is basically being thoughtful, being a great partner to founders, investing early in enterprise software companies, and helping them grow from zero to hopefully, multiple billions of dollars.
What were those early days at Greylock like for you? You had a pretty early investment in Docker, right?
That was my first investment, in 2013.
Yeah, great choice.
Thanks.
We've spoken a bunch on this podcast about that first investment, which, as I understand, is often one of the most stressful investments in a VC's career. How did you land on Docker?
I would say two things. First, the partnership's super supportive. And the way they think about it is like, don't overthink your first investment. Think about your first 4 or 5 investments. Think of it as a basket of 4 or 5 projects, because if you think of like your first investment, you're going to overthink your first. And it's not going to be your last. And so the best way to think about it or get over that fear, the anxiety of your first investment, which is still going to happen because, it's your first investment period. But if you think about like, look, this would be one of 4 investments, one of 5 investments I'm going to make over the next 2 or 3 years. Some will do better than others. Then you place less emphasis, less one-itis, if you will, on the one deal. So that kind of was a great mindset going into it. Secondly, as I looked at Docker, it was 2 things. One, it was familiar with what Solomon was building, which was similar to what we're doing with Warden and containers at VMware, the Cloud Foundry, was really inspired by dynos at Heroku, right? And obviously that was all built upon a bunch of work Google did with Linux at Google and Solaris containers and on and on. So there's a long history of this technology patterns, if you will, like, again, we're studying what's happened in the past. And I remember I called up Ben Golub, the CEO of Docker at the time, Solomon's founder and CTO. And I said, hey, Ben, I'm Jerry at Greylock, and I want to talk about investing in Docker. And Ben said to me, it was November 2013. He's like, oh, I'm going to Hong Kong for the OpenStack Summit next week. Are you going to be there? I said, yes. Yes, I am. Hang up the phone. Basically bought a flight and a ticket to Hong Kong next week.
Great.
Chased down Ben and the Docker team in Hong Kong at OpenStack Summit and convinced Ben that he should raise money from Greylock and yours truly. And so that's how my first deal happened, basically in finding a great technologist like Solomon and chasing down the CEO at halfway around the world at a conference.
I love the persistence. You've had a pretty consistent track record of enterprise technology at Greylock. Notable to me is Docker and, of course, Cloudera. Do you have a penchant for investing in businesses built on top of open source?
I say that what I'm looking for, Peter, is you're always trying to ride a wave bigger than yourself, bigger than your competitors, right? And what I mean by that is what I'm looking for as an investor is just changes in distribution more than anything else. So you think about, real quickly before I get open source, mainframe to client server, you're selling software not to the mainframe, but to a PC. From client server PCs to the browser, now we're selling software through a browser. The browser to cloud mobile, now you're selling software or ads from in the cloud or on a screen that you're holding on your smartphone. So really what's most disruptive for a startup is riding new changes in distribution that the incumbents is hard to follow, because incumbents, they're the victims of their own success. They're used to selling software through a PC channel or browser channel. And so these new channels or new methods of distribution are really powerful. So open source, be it Docker or Cloudera or all the other projects that we've worked at Greylock, and Greylock actually was an investor in Red Hat back in the day.
Oh, right.
My partner, Bill Kaiser. Open source is a new way of getting software and bits into the hands of our customers, right? And that's a wave we believe in and ride, much like we believe in mobile for consumer or for other software deployments. And so if you think about what I've done at Greylock, both on the infrastructure side and cloud side, think about how open source changes how you get software, how the cloud changes how you get software, like databases or security software. I'm investing in a company called Cato Networks, that's software-defined wide area networks, right? Which is an incredible company because it changes how you think about purchasing networking from location to location. Or I think about some of the SaaS companies I invested in, be it Gladly, Spoke, or Blend. They're all cloud hosted. So again, changing how you consumer software, and they're changing how you get software from you as an enterprise to your end user. And your end user is going to be a consumer. In the case of Blend, it's like mortgage application software hosted in the cloud, or it could be an enterprise IT buyer like Spoke, where it's going to be your CIO or VP of IT. So I think a lot, Peter, about distribution and channels. Like, how do you get technology in the bits in the hands of your users? And that could be a developer, it could be IT buyer, it could be a CFO, it could be a VP of sales.
Okay, so when you think about open source, you think about it as a distribution channel. Like this is a really cost-effective way of distributing your software.
Open source is it's a distribution to reduces friction in, call it, awareness and trial, right, for sure. Number two, it's also leveraging, called the wisdom of the crowds, the wisdom of the developers. So instead of having a single company or developer driving your roadmap or driving decisions, you can read the signals of the open source community. In terms of going deeper on these questions, it makes it easier for you to kind of figure out where your customers want to go and ask those questions because you have a whole community leading you. So on one hand, it just reduces friction across the board, reduces friction on trial, adoption, reduces friction on customers giving feedback because the open source community will lead you.
You touched on a theme you wrote about a while ago, the sort of 3 enterprise buyers. I'm going to misremember the name of the article.
Something like triangles.
The triangles, right. Yeah. Jerry's triangles, in which you say, these days when you sell to enterprises, you're selling to 3 people. You're selling to a CMO, a CIO, or a CTO, and a CFO. Give us just like a brief summary of how these 3 players work together in an enterprise buying decision.
Sure. As you get to know me, Peter, you realize I think of the world of these, apply frameworks to everything, from investing to startups to how I run product, right? And what I mean with 3 buyers is really just even a layer deeper. There's 3 systems of record in any company. So your company, from your pizza stand to your Fortune 100 auto manufacturer, there's really 3 systems of record that make that company. Your customers, your employees, and your assets, right? Those are really the 3 parts of the balance sheet that's your company. And so as a buyer or a seller or a startup, you're really selling to the CMO, the VP of sales, right? So who owns your customer record, which is basically Salesforce and CRM are trying to own everything pre-sales and post-sales. But the customer record is who you're selling or who you care about. Your employees, so you're selling to either your IT person or VP of HR or VP of talent. It's like you're selling a system record around your employees. So that's everything from hire to fire, recruiting, training, bonuses, et cetera, managing your employees, because that's the asset for any knowledge economy. And the third thing you care about is your assets. And that could be IP, it could be physical assets, it could be financial assets if you're an investment bank or a commercial bank. And so when you think about those 3 records, those are where a lot of software companies in Valley have been created, like HR software, Workday, CRM software, Salesforce, financial, SAP and Oracle, or ERP, Oracle, right? And so as an investor or as a founder, you want to break down, okay, if I want to build a really valuable company, I had to either play in one of those axes or this triangle or navigate the intersections between these.
So the 2 investments we talked about, Cloudera, Docker, are both in the 3rd prong of this triangle.
IT buyer.
IT assets, helping companies sort of manage infrastructure. Tell me about a play you've made in one of the other legs of this triangle.
Sure. So on the sales side, I invested in a company called Gladly that's talking about B2C customer support, so business consumer help desk. So today, think about multiple channels. You have when your plane is delayed, right? You either tweet at United or American Airlines or Delta. You maybe text them, maybe call them, maybe go to their Facebook page, and the customer experience across a bunch of these retail channels is just broken, right? Because one is ticket-based or problem ticket-based, not Peter or Jerry-based, and it's just fragmented. So Gladly is basically trying to create 2 things. One, an omni-channel customer support experience, right? So it was like, you're not a number, you're Peter, you're Jerry. And number 2 is trying to apply some level of machine learning or intelligence to basically solve a bunch of these problems for you, right? Because a lot of these questions, from a delayed flight or tracking a package, either have been asked a million times or can be automated. And so Gladly's trying to be modern delight for the customer. And JetBlue was their first customer trying to fix that airline problem, because I think, that's one we've all felt firsthand.
Great. I want to bring it back to Jerry's career. When I think about you sort of re-entering venture, Series B and Docker makes a ton of sense, right? Like, you have a decade's worth of experience in enterprise software. You're familiar with containers. This is straight up your alley. Tell me about the decision to venture into a slightly more foreign domain. Like, I'm imagining that you could have just made enterprise software bets, like enterprise IT bets for your entire career. What made you want to explore other forms of enterprise software?
I think it's a combination of where my interests grow and lie, and there's a bunch of just great technologies and how AI is changing application software and SaaS software, how mobile is changing it, how big data is changing it. And number two, Chris, the great founders kind of lead you everywhere, right? So a lot of VCs say, hey, I'm going to do a deal in this space, or I care about this space. But the truth is, we are often led by the best founders. And so when a great founder walks in your door, you're going to know it and you're going to spend time with him or her. But I think what happened for me is I understand technology from my decade of VMware, but then I spent time like at Cloudera, so I understood the value of data. That also said, okay, so how data and infrastructure is changing how you build applications. And so when you combine, my knowledge of Docker and VMware, plus the early experience with Cloudera and how big data is changing how you have insights in customers that led to like machine learning, AI, you realize, look, at the end of the day, IT exists to support a business process, right? It could be order to cash, hire to fire, right? It is a business process. You don't build IT for IT's sake. And what I was seeing through these investments were the processes, the workflows in a company were changing dramatically by one, going cloud native, how you build these applications, and then how they use data. And one of the insights was I was seeing how these new applications were being built, right? Not just big CRM applications, but customer intimacy, support applications, IT help desk applications, vertical SaaS companies attacking construction, like a investment I made in Rumbix, or healthcare, or real estate. And when you see where the developers are going, and you see how data can change these applications, that led me to these investments in Gladly, Spoke, Rumbix, and Blend.
So you're pointing to sort of an invisible theme across your investments that you've written about, which is data and sort of machine intelligence as a defensible layer.
As a moat, yeah.
Yeah. You wrote this great article last year that changed the way I think about data called Systems of Intelligence, in which you posit that companies are moving away from IP and high switching costs as moats and towards data and sort of the flywheel effects you can create from data and machine learning. I'd love to walk through an example here. Can you talk to us about how data allows a company like Rumbix to build defensibility?
Sure. So I think this framework, the system of intelligence, came from conversations we're having with smart founders, and we're talking about how, I think the title of my blog was The New Moats. And we're sitting around saying, wow, the old moats, defensibility, like economies of scale or secret IP or deep IP, are getting harder and harder to sustain. And the reasons where open source and cloud are changing how you monetize your IP, right? Instead of selling like a widget, you're selling a service for the widget, right? And number two, the economies of scale are so huge now because Amazon and Google and Azure allows anyone to deploy an application quickly, and they want to compete against Amazon itself. That's a huge order. So all of a sudden, thinking where the moats are moving towards new areas, and historically, the two areas where on top of scale and IP, people built what was called a system of record, the database. Like just talked about the three systems of record, people, assets, and customers, or system of engagement, right? The user experience between your developer or your user and the application. That was Windows, right? Or the browser wars, which I lived through, right? That was super stressful for Microsoft because they thought Netscape and the browser was going to be the system of engagement for software going forward. And then more recently, mobile, right? So Android versus iOS. Mobile became the system of engagement and how you consumed applications. And obviously that led to the smart war battle that we're still living through now. But in between the system of engagement and system of record lies what I call the system of intelligence, which I think is a very fertile place for a startup to play in because, one, you can either build a data set in a vertical like construction like Runbix that no one else has. Google's not going to have the data that Runbix has around construction labor productivity, or the data Blend is going to have around your mortgage software application. So you build healthcare verticals, real estate verticals, construction verticals, data that the incumbents aren't going to have. Because if you're building an app to identify cats or dogs or hot dog or not hot dog, you're not going to do that better than Google or Facebook. But if you're building a construction vertical software like Runbix or Blend in real estate or a healthcare vertical that we've done as well, that's a natural place where a startup can create a moat. The other way to create a moat or a system intelligence around data is crossing multiple system of record, right? Which you seem is maybe not intuitive at first, but really is when you dig deeper, because Salesforce is going to build a system intelligence on their own CRM. Einstein, right? Or Oracle try to do that on top of their own applications, their own data. But there are certain categories or problems inside a company that if you can build intelligence across multiple databases, multiple applications, you can actually create another moat. And that led to my investment in a company called Spoke that's doing kind of IT help desk or internal ticketing across IT, HR facilities. So asking questions like, I need a new computer, to what's the best coffee place nearby, to how do I contribute my 401k, that's 3 or 4 different systems of record that I need to query right there. So talking to 3 or 4 different applications, that's difficult. That's friction for the end user. Spoke will create a frictionless system to talk to all 3 databases and give you your answer. And so when you find a way to either go deep in a vertical, where you're building on data that no one else has, construction, financial services, healthcare, et cetera, or going across databases or across system records where no one incumbent is going to dominate, that's another defensible place, right? It's a natural for a startup to play across multiple incumbents. Otherwise, you might as well just buy like public stocks in Workday, Salesforce, ServiceNow, et cetera, because they're going to own their own silos. But you have to go cross silo to find, I think, a new defensible moat.
Either you're going cross silos or you're picking a niche.
And going deep, right? So I think those are the 2 logical ways around system intelligence. Go deep on a market or a vertical or a niche, which I think is a logical evolution of the cloud market, right? A bunch of horizontal apps, now vertical apps. And we're seeing that from, look, self-driving cars is an expression of a vertical niche, right? Logistics and transportation and collecting data around maps, driver data, et cetera, right? I mean, you look at all the startups in the self-driving car space, and then comes like Waymo or Uber, they're collecting data with cameras and maps that other players aren't, that Ford doesn't have or GM doesn't have, and those incumbents are trying to catch up. So again, that's an example of a niche where you're collecting data other people don't have, or you go across verticals, across silos, across other natural barriers.
I want to shift the conversation back to you a little bit. You've been at Greylock for almost 5 years now, in your second tour of venture duty. What's changed in those 5 years?
It's interesting, Peter. Every year, I think about how to get better at this job. Right? And there's different ways to try to get better at the job. It's how do I find great investments in great companies? So, what thought leadership can I put out in the world, like new moats or system intelligence that would attract founders? Or how do I sell myself in Greylock better? How do I influence founders better, right? And when I'm on the board, and then how do I work better with other investors around the table? And so I think every year there are different aspects of the job you can work on. I think the core investing judgment's tough because the investment life cycle is so long, 5 years, 8 years, 10 years for these exits. So you can try to improve upon your judgment every year, trying to see what investments you passed on that you should have leaned in, or what investments did you do that you probably should have avoided. So I think a lot about that. And then I think a lot about the mechanics of doing the job better as an investor, as a board member, as a mentor to the founders. Then I think about different spaces, right? Mm-hmm. Like, this framework of system intelligence didn't come out of nowhere. It came from me analyzing the market and thinking about what attributes would make a great company, and not just a good company, but a great one. Because the hard part of this job is there's a lot of good companies out there that you can invest in. And as a partner at Greylock, I'm lucky enough and fortunate enough to meet a bunch of great founders and good companies. Mm-hmm. But what we're looking for, that exceptional company that could be 10, 20, 30, 40, 100 billion, right? The LinkedIn, the Facebooks, the Workdays of the world. And those are special. And so we're really trying to separate the great from the good is hard.
You mentioned 4 fundamental skills of venture capital. You said sort of marketing both yourself and the firm, finding and diligencing investments, helping founders, and working with other folks on a board. I'd love to pick one of them that you've been focusing on and sort of talk through your own educational experience. Is there one of those that's been particularly prominent for you recently?
The past couple of years, Peter, a lot of the joy in learning has been the last 2. It's how to be a good mentor, advisor, board member to the founders and executives, and how to be a good partner, right, around the table, not to just my partners at Greylock, but also the other investors within the company on the board, because it's all influence, right? As a board member, you don't run the company, you don't tell the CEO what to do, you give advice, you ask questions, and you realize that every founder, every executive you work with reacts differently. And so the way you communicate with one founder is going to be different from another founder. So a 3-time founder like Shlomo Kramer and how I work with him on Cato Networks is very different than a first-time founder who dropped out of his MIT PhD program to start a company. And because they have different sets of experiences and different things you need to learn. And the past couple of years, I've been learning how to work with different types of founders at different stages of their career. And that's been a joy because investing's great. It's an intellectually challenging exercise to think about trends, technologies, but it's really the joy of kind of working with these teams and companies and helping these organizations grow has been a lot of fun.
What does it mean to be a great board member? What sort of behavior do you appreciate in your fellow investors?
I think as a board member, and I think when I was at VMware, if I were a founder running a team, what would I want from my board? Mm-hmm. And the key is make sure you don't lose the forest for the trees, right? Is let's figure out in every board meeting and any given quarter, there's only 2 or 3 issues that I think really make or break the company that you should be thinking about. Right? The board's job is not to get in the weeds of the product detail or HR organizations. They can give you advice, they can ask questions on the product reviews, but at the end of the day, there's really 2 or 3 questions at every board meeting that should be top of mind. Mm-hmm. And the way I like to be a board member or a partner to the founders I work with is like, hey, ask those 2 or 3 questions, challenge the founder, him or her, to think about them and push them, right? So our job is to worry about risk, what could go wrong, what could go right. Our job as a board member is to push you to be more aggressive or pull you back when you're being reckless. But really, it's what are the 2 or 3 questions? And that goes back to the first framework I said. Good versus great at your job or success is what 10 features matter in the product, what 10 questions matter at your job as a CEO day in, day out. As a board member or investor, what 2 or 3 questions matter right now? And if we can answer the right 2 or 3 questions, the rest would take care of itself.
Mm-hmm. We've heard a lot on this podcast about the relationship between investors and founders, what it means to be a mentor, how to influence a founder, how to adapt your working style to fit that of the founder. We haven't heard a lot about relationships between investors, and I'd love to pry into this a little bit. Like you mentioned that something to be good at as a venture capitalist is partnership, working with other investors. What are you trying to cultivate in that realm?
It's interesting because some people say VC is a lonely job because you're making the calls, you're not making the calls. And they'll also often say it's interesting because venture capitalists are this weird frenemy relation. You compete with VCs to win a deal, but then you work with them on the board. The way I like to approach it is every investment I work on, you have a team, right? And that, to make it less lonely, that team is, you and the founding team, but also you and the other investors. And so when I join a board or have another person join me, you and me, Peter, that's my team for this company, right? This NewCo, we're working together to make NewCo successful. And when you approach like that, so when we're invested together, we're actually on the same virtual company, same team. And that's the attitude I try to think in that room, in that board, with that founder, solving that problem together. And then on another company, I could be, trying to win another investment, another Series A deal, and we're competing. And, that's how the industry goes. But it's interesting to compartmentalize project to project, company to company. And so by being a good partner to another investor and to the CEOs, you talk about the founder investor dynamic, but also it's like, hey, how do you and I, as two board members in the same company, communicate? We have the same objective to make this company successful. And how you and I communicate, so like you and I have the same concerns, because you and I have your top three concerns are different from my top three concerns, then something's wrong. And so either I'm not seeing something, you're not seeing something. So let's have that conversation. We're most powerful as an advisor to the company if we think the top three issues are the same, like hire a new VP of sales, like, increase the product velocity, hire, a new VP of engineering, or do a different partnership. But if you and I don't have the same three priorities, the same three questions, we're going to be less effective as board members. But mostly, if we're seeing different things, great. You're closer. You'll see other aspects. You have a different relationship with the founders than I do, and I'm going to learn from you. And I try to learn from my other investors. I'll learn from other board members. My first board was Docker. I invested behind Peter Fenton, who I knew from back in the day, and he did Docker at Benchmark. And Peter's a fantastic investor and fantastic board member. And so just learning from him on the Docker board has been educational for me. And so I'm always trying to learn from the folks around me because they have a different experience set than I do, and they're going to see different things. So I think that's what it means to be a good partner. If we're all the same, why would you as a founder pick three VCs that all thought the same, look the same, talk the same, right? You want a diversity on your board, but also you want a functional board, people that can actually communicate and work with you.
So there's a balance between diving into disagreement and finding the alignment that you need to be a good board.
I think you want, like all things, a creative tension. You want your product head and your engineer head and your company to have a creative tension, right? Or your sales and your engineer to also have a creative tension. Because I think that tension, like all things, creates the best result. And just like as a founder or CEO, you probably want folks around the table that are going to help you make the company better. And that's going to have tension between the founder and the investor because they're going to push you. They're going to ask you a bunch of questions. And you want investors that all see different parts of your business, from a technical side to the business side to the partnering side. So you want that tension. At least it's not disagreement or fighting, but you want people to be pushing in all aspects of your business because there's multiple muscle groups you need to exercise. And when you have different board members working out different muscles of your company, then you're going to be stronger.
Is there a particular muscle that you tend to focus on?
Oh gosh, I think the muscle varies in the life cycle of the company, right? So I think when I do a seed investment or a Series A investment, it's 2 or 3 individuals, PowerPoint, and maybe some code. I think there it's hiring that muscle, so it's team building, and it's finding the right customers for early product market fit, iterating on the product, and hiring the right people. Then I think, call it a Series B inflection point where you're about go-to-market, then that's all about exercising the go-to-market muscle. Pricing, packaging, channels, right? What's the right marketing message? What's the right way to kind of build a go-to-market organization? And then if you're lucky enough at Series D, Series E, and the company scaling, there's a whole bunch of other issues around, upgrading the team, upgrading your products. How do you become a truly global organization? And my partner, Reid Hoffman, has this podcast called Masters of Scale, where he talks about the different phases. I think it goes like family, village, nation, et cetera, because there's different challenges at different phases. And so I'd say there are different muscles you need to exercise at different phases of the company. I was lucky enough to see multiple phases, like so from a couple hundred people to 15,000 at VMware. And my work at Greylock, I've worked from 2 founders or single founders to coming a Series D like blend with 500 employees. And the good investors and the good board members know which muscle you should work at any given time.
I ask all my guests the same question in closing, which is, what do you wish you knew going into this that you know now? What advice would you have for your younger self?
So if I could talk to myself 5 years ago when I was starting out at this tour of duty with Greylock Partners, to realize that what works for me is different than what works for other VCs, right? So how I build a relationship with a founder and get conviction on investment and build that trust and conviction invest in a company is going to be different from other partners at Greylock and other VC firms. And to realize what you're good at, what your strike zone is, and just stick with it and don't worry about everyone else.
Jerry, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on Venture Confidential.
Where can our listeners find you, and who should be getting in touch with you?
So you can find me at greylock.com website or jerry@greylock.com, just to email me, or I think at Jerry Chen on Twitter. It's probably wanting to see my blogs and musings and random comments on what's happening in the world. That's probably a good place to start.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Venture Confidential. Venture Confidential is brought to you by Heavybit. To learn more about Heavybit, visit heavybit.com. And while you're there, check out our library, home to great educational talks by top investors, entrepreneurs, and other industry leaders.